I was 21 years old when this happened, and it's one of those experiences that I don't talk about much because every time I do, it feels like I'm right back there again. My friend Jake and I had planned a weekend trip out to his family's lake house near Guntersville. It was late in the summer, right before things started cooling off, and we figured it would be a good way to get out of town for a couple days. We figured we'd fish a little, drink a few beers, and just relax. The place was pretty isolated. It sat at the end of a long gravel road with thick woods on both sides, and the house itself overlooked a wide stretch of water with a small dock extending out from the shoreline. There were a few other houses scattered around the lake, but they were spaced far enough apart that you couldn't really see anyone else unless you went looking for them. When we got there Friday evening, everything felt normal. We unloaded the truck, brought in our gear, stocked the fridge, and spent the first couple of hours just hanging out inside while the sun went down. Once it got dark, we took a couple of beers out onto the back deck and sat there listening to the water. There's something about being near a lake at night that feels different. It's quiet, but not completely quiet. You hear small things like water shifting against the dock or fish breaking the surface, and every now and then, something in the distance that you just can't quite place. At first, it was relaxing. Then we started noticing something. There was a sound. It was faint, and at first I thought it was just part of the water, but the longer we sat there, the more it stood out. It sounded like something tapping against wood. The noise was slow and consistent, coming from the direction of the dock. Jake noticed it too, and leaned forward a little, staring out toward the water. He asked me if I heard that, and I nodded. We both sat there listening, trying to figure out what it could be. I told him that it was probably just a branch or something knocking against the dock. Jake didn't respond right away, he just kept staring. And then the sound came again. 3 taps. It had a rhythm to it that didn't feel random. After a minute or two, it stopped completely, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. We didn't stay outside much longer after that. We went back in, locked up, and tried to brush it off like it was nothing. The rest of the night went by without anything happening, and eventually we both went to bed. Jake took the upstairs room, and I crashed on the couch in the living room. I remember turning the TV on low just to have something in the background as I fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know what time it was at first, but I could tell it was late. The TV was still on, casting a dim light across the room, and everything else was quiet. Then I heard it again, that same tapping sound, only this time it was louder and closer. I sat up slowly, my eyes moving toward the glass door that led out to the dock. The sound came again. This time my chest tightened as I tried to make sense of it. I slowly got up off the couch and walked toward the door, keeping my distance as I looked out into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything. The reflection from inside made it hard to see out clearly, so I leaned slightly to the side, trying to get a better angle. That's when I noticed something near the dock. A shape. It was hard to see in the darkness, but whatever it was low in the water, almost blending in with the blanket of darkness, but it was definitely there. I squinted, focusing on it, trying to figure out what I was looking at. And then it moved. Not like something swimming, more like something standing. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was seeing didn't make sense. The water should have been too deep for anything to be standing out there. I felt a chill run through me as the shape shifted again, slowly turning toward the house. Then it lifted one arm and tapped against the dock. I stepped back immediately, my heart starting to pound. I called out Jake's name. My voice was low but urgent. I didn't get a response, so I turned toward the stairs and said it again louder. A few seconds later, I heard movement upstairs, followed by his voice. I told him that there was something outside. That was enough to get him moving. He came down quickly, still half asleep, but alert enough to know that something was wrong. We both stood near the living room, looking toward the glass door. I pointed out toward the dock and asked him if he saw it. For a moment he stared, and then slowly he nodded. Neither of us moved closer. We just stood there watching. The thing in the water started moving toward the dock ladder. It slowly reached out, grabbed onto it, and began to pull itself up. The sound of water dripping off of it mixed with the creaking of the wood as it climbed. It moved slowly, like each motion took effort. When it finally stepped onto the dock, the moonlight caught it just enough for us to see its outline. It was tall, and its limbs looked long and off in a way that made it hard to focus on. It took another step forward, heading toward the path that led up to the house. Jake backed up slightly and told me to lock the door. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and locked it, then moved back again, keeping my eyes on the figure. We both stood there, silent, as it made its way up the path. All I could hear now was the sound of wet footsteps hitting the wood on the deck. They were slow and heavy. Then it stopped, right outside of the door. We could hear little droplets of water dripping onto the boards, but neither of us spoke, or even moved for that matter. Then there was a knock. 3 slow taps against the glass. The same rhythm, the same sound we had been hearing all night. I felt my throat go dry as I stared at the door. Jake shook his head slightly, like he couldn't believe what was happening. Then the figure leaned forward, and its face came into view, pressing up against the glass. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the faint light from the inside of the house. Its skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight in a way that didn't look natural. And when it spoke, the sound that came out didn't match what we were looking at. Let me in. Its voice was wrong. It sounded like it was coming from deep underwater. It was distorted and uneven. I felt something in my chest drop as I realized this wasn't a person. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me back, and told me that we're leaving. I didn't argue. We backed away slowly at first, not taking our eyes off the door, then turned and ran for the front of the house. We didn't grab anything. Not our phones, not our keys at first, until Jake doubled back for them. We got out the front door and into the truck as fast as we could. As we pulled away, I looked back once, just for a second. The back of the house was still visible through the trees, and I could see it, standing on the deck, watching us leave. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main road. Neither of us said much after that. There really wasn't anything to say. Apparently Jake told his family what had happened, and not long after they put the place up for sale. They never told anyone why, but I know what we saw that night. And I know one thing for sure. Whatever came out of that water had been there long before we ever showed up. I was 22 years old when this happened, and even now I still catch myself thinking about it whenever I'm near water at night. My friend Chris and I had been invited to stay at his cousin's lake house for a long weekend near the Lake of the Ozarks. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small place tucked into a quiet cove, but it was far enough away from everything that you felt like you had the whole area to yourself. That was kind of the point of being out there. We arrived late Friday afternoon after a long drive. Both of us were tired, but overall in a good mood. The house sat up on a small incline with a gravel path that led down to a dock at the water's edge. There were other houses across the lake, but the cove we were in was pretty isolated. And once the sun went down, it got dark in a way you don't really get to experience in the city. We spent the evening doing exactly what we planned to do. We grilled burgers, had a few drinks, and sat out on the dock watching the water as the light faded. Boats passed earlier in the evening, but by the time it got fully dark, everything had settled down. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where small sounds carry. At some point, maybe around 11 or so, we started hearing something from across the water. At first, it sounded like voices. They were faint and hard to make out, but definitely voices. Chris turned to us and squinted through the darkness, asking if we heard that. I nodded. We both sat there listening. It sounded like someone talking, maybe laughing, but it was far enough away that we couldn't exactly tell where it was coming from. He told me it was probably people on the other side of the cove. I mean, that seemed like the most reasonable explanation. And sound does travel weird over the water at nighttime. We didn't really think much of it at the time. And a couple minutes later, we had completely forgotten it had even happened. Eventually, we headed back up to the house. We locked up and got ready to go to bed. We both went into our bedrooms and crashed basically immediately. I remember leaving a lamp on because the house felt a little too dark without it, and I liked sleeping with a little bit of light on. I must have passed out pretty quickly. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up, but when I did, something felt off. The lamp was on and the house was quiet, but there was a sound. It was a low, muffled voice. I stayed still for a second, just listening. I thought that it sounded like someone talking, but not from outside. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. My eyes moved slowly toward the hallway that led to Chris's room. I couldn't see anything from where I was, just the dark opening of the hallway. That's when I heard it again. It was a whisper. It was too low to understand, but it was definitely there. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to pick up. I called out Chris's name quietly, but there was no answer. Then, faintly in the distance, I heard movement from the direction of the kitchen. I turned my head toward it, my eyes adjusting to the light. At first, everything looked normal, and then I noticed something. The back door was open. Not wide open, but just enough to let the night air move the curtain slightly. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew we had closed that door. I got up carefully, my eyes locked on the doorway. I called Chris's name again, louder this time, but still there was no response. I took a few slow steps toward the kitchen, every sound in the house suddenly feeling amplified. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and then the curtain moved again, and I heard it. From right outside there were footsteps. They were slow and dragging slightly across the wooden deck. I froze immediately, and the footsteps stopped, right on the other side of the door. I could see the faint outline of someone through the curtain, just standing there. I felt my chest tighten as I stared at it. Then the curtain shifted just enough for me to see a face. There was a man, and his eyes were fixed on me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It felt wrong, like he wasn't reacting to me being there at all, almost like he expected it. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of a chair. This time I shouted Chris's name, and I heard movement from behind me. His bedroom door opened and he stepped out, confused, asking me what was going on. I told him that there was someone outside. Chris looked toward the kitchen and then back at me, then walked forward a few steps. He asked me what I was talking about, but before I could respond, the man outside lifted his hand and knocked on the door. The sound echoed throughout the house, causing Chris to stop where he was. Now Chris saw him. He asked me who the hell that was. Neither of us had an answer. Then the man knocked again, and he spoke. In a calm voice, he said that his boat had broken down and asked if we could help him out. Something about the way that he said them just didn't sit right with us. It was too even, too controlled, like he had planned it or rehearsed it in his head before. Chris shook his head slightly and told me not to open the door. He didn't even need to say that, because I wasn't planning to. The man stood there for a few more seconds, staring at us through the glass. And then he tried the handle. It didn't open because we had locked it. He looked down at it and then back up at us, still smiling. Then he stepped back, out of view. We both stood there, not moving, just listening. For a moment, there was nothing, and then we heard footsteps again. They weren't going away. They were moving along the side of the house, toward the front. Chris grabbed his phone and said he's calling someone. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the door. A few seconds later, we heard something from the front of the house, almost like a faint metallic sound, like someone testing the front door. Chris lowered his phone slightly, his face changing. He's trying the other door, he said. That's when it hit both of us. This wasn't someone asking for help. He was trying to get inside. We backed away from the kitchen, moving toward the living room. The sound of the front door had stopped, and then we heard footsteps again, moving back toward the deck. We both turned our heads, and we saw the curtain shift, and the man was there again, closer than before. He leaned forward slightly, pressing his face onto the glass. His smile was gone now. His expression was flat and cold. "I know you're in there," he said. My stomach dropped. Chris finally hit call on his phone, stepping back further. The man watched us for a second longer, and then, without a word, he turned around and walked off into the darkness. We stood there for a long time after that, neither of us moving or speaking. Needless to say, we didn't sleep the rest of that night. We kept every light on in the house until morning, and when the sun finally came up, we went outside to check the dock. There was a boat tied up that we hadn't seen the night before. It was small and old, barely held together. There was no one in it, no gear, no signs of where he went. We left that day. We just didn't feel like staying the rest of that weekend. And to this day, I still think about the way he said it, how the man told us that he knew that we were in there, because it didn't sound like a guess.